Alan Shaw knew hard years better than most men in eastern Montana, but that morning felt heavier than usual. The summer sun rose over the wide plains like a slow burden, spilling warm light across his small ranch. His cattle pens were thinning. His barn roof sagged in places where storms had torn through last winter. And at 59, Alan carried the tired look of a man who had held his land together with grit and worn rope for far too long. Yet none of that explained the feeling that struck him the moment he stepped into the Billings livestock auction. It happened when he saw the gray gelding tied near the back rail. The horse looked so beaten down it made Alan stop walking. His coat was dull, rib bones sharp against thin skin, hooves cracked from neglect. He didn't lift his head when folks walked by. Most didn't look twice at him anyway. The handler tugged hard on the lead rope, and the gelding stumbled forward. "Last lot of the day," the auctioneer called from the stand. "Gray gelding, age unknown, came off an old estate up near Elkhorn. $60 to start. Otherwise he's headed for the processing plant." Elkhorn. That name dropped into Alan's mind like a stone in a still pond. He remembered the stories from his childhood, a mining town high in the mountains. Silver strikes, men with soot on their faces, rich dreams that dried up fast. The place had been abandoned for decades. Only the wind lived there now. But the horse lifted his head just once. Only for a moment. Only long enough for his eyes to meet Alan's. There was something in them. Not begging. Not fear. Something steady. Something proud. It reminded Alan of the old miners he knew as a boy. Men who worked hard, kept quiet, and deserved better than life ever gave them. $60, the auctioneer said again. "Do I hear 60? Alan's hand rose before he knew he meant to do it. 60! 60 going once, twice, sold! A few men shook their heads at him. One chuckled under his breath. Alan didn't care. 3 minutes later, he owned a horse he didn't need and couldn't afford. He named him Chance. It felt right. Chance was all either of them had left. Back at the ranch, Chance settled into the small pasture behind the barn. He ate well and moved slow but steady. Alan brushed him each evening, watching the dull coat begin to shine and the ribs soften with new weight. Chance never caused trouble, never kicked, never spooked, never complained. Just an old horse, grateful for a place to rest. 2 quiet weeks passed. Then, on a cold morning with thin clouds stretching across the sky, Alan stepped outside and froze. Chance stood at the western fence, staring straight toward the mountains, not looking, staring. His whole body was locked tight, ears forward, eyes fixed on the distant ridges, as if something out there was calling him. "What are you looking at, old boy?" Alan asked, stepping closer. Chance didn't move, not an inch. The next morning he did the same, and the next, always facing west, always tense, as if waiting for someone or something. On the 4th morning, it changed. Chance began walking the fence line, pacing from one end to the other, stopping only to paw at the gate with a sharp, urgent rhythm. Dust flew under his hooves. He looked back at Alan, snorting like he was trying to tell him something. "You want to go somewhere?" Alan asked. For a heartbeat, it felt like the horse nodded. It was foolish to think so. Horses didn't nod. Horses didn't point. Horses didn't have destinations. Yet Alan found himself reaching for the halter. "Fine," he muttered. "Show me what's so important." The moment the gate swung open, Chance surged forward, not in a run, but in a firm, purposeful walk. He wasn't wandering. He wasn't hesitating. He wasn't stopping to graze. He knew exactly where he was going. Alan had to jog just to keep up. They climbed into foothills Alan hadn't ridden in years, following narrow trails, snaking between pines and stone outcrops. Chance never paused, not even once. 2 hours later, the gelding stopped at the mouth of a narrow canyon hidden behind a ridge of dark rock. A thin stream ran through it, cold and clear as glass. Chance went straight to the water. Then he began pawing, hard, sending cold spray flying across the banks. "Easy now," Alan said, stepping toward him. "What's gotten into you?" Chance kept pawing, faster, deeper, tearing up the gravel, and that was when Alan saw it. A flicker of color among the stones, a shine that didn't belong. He knelt, reaching into the icy water. His fingers closed around something small and heavy. When he lifted it, his breath left him in a single stunned gasp. It was gold, a nugget large as his thumbnail. He looked at Chance, who had finally stopped pawing and stood watching him with calm, steady eyes, as if he had brought Alan here on purpose. Alan Shaw sat back on his heels, the cold water dripping from his fingers as he stared at the gold nugget resting in his palm. The weight of it felt unreal. For a long moment he didn't move. The only sound in the canyon was the stream whispering over stone and Chance breathing behind him. "How did you know?" Alan whispered. Chance only swished his tail and looked toward the mountains again, like the answer wasn't his to give. Alan spent the next hour moving slowly along the stream. Everywhere the water slowed or curved, he found more gold. Not flakes, not dust, real nuggets. Some as small as a pea, others heavy enough to make his hand drop a little when he lifted them. By the time he walked out of the canyon, he had a pocket full of treasure worth more than anything he'd seen in his life. Back at home that night, the kitchen lantern glowed over 6 nuggets laid out on the table. Alan stared at them so long his eyes burned. His chest felt tight like he'd been holding his breath since morning. He didn't sleep much. When dawn came, he saddled Chance again. "Let's see what you really found," he said softly. The old horse seemed almost eager as they headed back toward the canyon. The second trip told Alan something bigger was going on. Upstream, past the place Chance had dug through the water, Alan found a collapsed old tunnel. Hand-cut beams, rotten support posts, the kind of work miners used in the 1800s. Water trickled out from under the fallen rocks, carrying bits of gold with it. Someone had worked this place, long ago, then lost it. By midday, Alan's head was spinning with ideas he couldn't calm. Could he file a claim? Could this land even be claimed? What if it belonged to the government? What if someone else discovered it? That night, sitting alone in the dim kitchen, he whispered the question that scared him most. What if this is too big for me? But when he looked outside and saw Chance standing quietly in the moonlight, he felt something else stir in him, a steadiness, a courage he thought he'd lost years ago. The next morning he rode into town to file a mining claim. The clerk barely glanced at him, just stamped papers, handed them back, and wished him luck he wasn't sure he deserved. For the next 2 weeks, Alan worked in secret. He took only what the stream had already washed free. No picks, no shovels, no digging, just patient, steady work. Gold nugget after gold nugget slid into his pan. Every single one felt like a new breath in his lungs. By the end of the second week, he had collected enough gold to change the future of his entire ranch. But the canyon wasn't done surprising him. On a warm June morning, just as Alan was packing up his tools, he heard voices echoing down the canyon walls. He froze. 3 strangers walked toward him, 2 young folks carrying notebooks and tools, and a woman with red hair braided down her back. She moved with purpose, like she belonged anywhere nature lived. "Hello there," she called out kindly. "Are you the claim holder?" Alan's stomach tightened. "That's right. Name's Alan Shaw." "I'm Dr. Victoria Lang," she said. "Montana State University, wildlife biology. These are my students. We're surveying aquatic habitats in this region." She knelt beside the stream. Then something changed in her face, her eyes widening, breath catching in her throat. "Kevin," she whispered. "Jennifer, come look." The students hurried over. "Is that?" Kevin gasped. "I think it is," Dr. Lang said, voice shaking just slightly. "Mr. Shaw, have you seen any small fish here? Silver-colored? Red spots behind the gills?" Alan rubbed his chin. "Yes, ma'am. Quite a few. They stay in the slower pools." "Doctor," Lang stood, her expression filled with excitement and something like disbelief. "Mr. Shaw," she said softly, "these fish were believed to be extinct." The word hit him like a hammer. Extinct. "We thought mining pollution wiped them out over 40 years ago," she continued. "But if they survived here, this canyon is priceless." It would be one of the most important wildlife discoveries in decades. Alan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What does that mean for my claim?" he asked. Dr. Lang's voice softened. "If this becomes critical habitat, which it almost certainly will, mining operations would be prohibited." Alan's world fell silent. The tunnel. The vein of gold. The fortune he'd barely let himself imagine. Gone. But Chance nudged his shoulder gently, as if telling him to breathe. That night, Alan didn't sleep. He stared at the gold he'd already collected, glittering in the lantern light, and thought about the fish still swimming in that clear stream, alive when the world believed they were gone forever. By sunrise, his mind was steady again. When Dr. Lang returned, Alan was already waiting for her. "Tell me something," he said. "If I only collect what's already in the stream, gold washed out naturally, could that harm the fish?" She studied him carefully. "If you use only pans," she said, "and avoid disturbing the deep pools, then no, it wouldn't harm them." Alan nodded. "Then I won't fight the habitat designation," he said. "Protect the canyon. I'll work around it." Dr. Lang blinked, surprised. "Mr. Shaw, you could be walking away from millions." "Maybe," Alan said, "but I won't walk away from what's right." Chance whinnied softly behind him, almost proud. Summer settled slowly over the Montana plains, warm winds moving through the grass like a quiet promise. Each morning, Alan saddled Chance and rode toward the canyon, not as a prospector chasing riches, but as a caretaker learning the land's secrets. The fish were real. The discovery was real, and the responsibility now rested on his shoulders. Dr. Lang and her students returned many times. They set up small tents, water gauges and wooden markers along the canyon. Alan watched them work, listened to their stories, and learned more about the rare species that had survived hidden for decades in the cold water. The canyon wasn't just beautiful. It was alive in a way few places left in the West still were. The gold he'd collected before the restrictions came into place totaled more than he had ever hoped for. Enough to repair the barn roof, enough to expand his herd, enough to breathe again, without fear of losing everything he'd built. But what he valued most were the days spent watching Chance graze peacefully by the stream, while researchers studied a world thought to be gone forever. Months passed, and word of the canyon began to spread, first in quiet circles, then in louder ones. Newspapers ran stories. A crew from a nature program wanted to film the area. A magazine wanted an interview. Folks in nearby towns started calling him the rancher who chose fish over gold. And to everyone's surprise, including his own, Alan didn't mind the nickname. Fish and Wildlife Services offered him a contract to protect the canyon, $60,000 a year to maintain the trails, keep watch for trespassers, guide researchers, and help protect the fragile ecosystem. For a man once afraid of losing his ranch, the steady income felt like the earth had shifted in his favor. Tourists came next. Small groups. Families. School children from miles away. They rode horses up the trail Alan marked himself, following him into the canyon while he told the story of the lost miner, the forgotten stream, and the gray horse who had led him to all of it. Chance became a kind of legend. Folks sent letters for him, drawings from children. One little girl wrote, "You saved the fish." "Thank you, Chance." Alan pinned every letter to the barn wall where Chance slept warmly each night. One crisp morning, nearly a year after that first gold nugget, Alan's daughter Emily arrived from Seattle. She sat beside him on the porch, watching Chance graze. "You could have been a millionaire," she said softly. "That tunnel probably held enough gold to buy half this county." "Maybe," Alan said, "but sometimes fortune looks different up close." Quote, Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you." He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that. Later that day, he took her riding into the canyon. The stream glimmered in the sunlight. The rare fish darted through the deeper pools like living silver sparks. The air hummed with the quiet mystery of a place protected by time itself. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered. "They made it through more than we did," Alan said. "Years of storms, pollution, ice, fire, and they still held on." "Like you," she said. He smiled, maybe like Chance. As the months passed, the canyon was named a protected natural landmark. Researchers came every season. New wildlife was documented. Documentaries were filmed. More school children visited, learning lessons Alan wished he'd known sooner in life. Every evening, Alan and Chance walked the fence line together as the sky turned gold and red. He'd scratch the old gelding behind the ears, whispering the same words he'd spoken the day he bought him. "You did good, old fella." Chance would nuzzle him gently as if to say he knew. By the next winter, Shaw Canyon Wildlife Preserve had become a treasured piece of Montana. The story of its discovery inspired folks far beyond the state line. And though the world talked about the gold, the fish, and the canyon, Alan always knew the truth. It began with a forgotten horse that nobody wanted, who carried a secret worth more than wealth, a horse who led him not to riches, but to purpose. On the coldest nights, when the wind howled across the plains and the barn lantern glowed warm against the dark, Alan would look at Chance and feel a quiet gratitude that filled his whole chest. If he hadn't lifted his hand at the auction, if he hadn't listened to the way Chance watched the mountains, if he had chased the gold instead of guarding the canyon, none of this would have happened. One life had changed another, and together they had saved an entire world. When spring returned, the first group of school children of the season stood gathered at the canyon overlook. Their breath caught when they saw the rare fish shimmering below. Alan told the tale one more time, how an old miner never made it back to file a claim, how his horse may have carried the memory across generations, and how a $60 bid had changed the course of everything. A boy raised his hand. "Mr. Shaw," he asked, "do you ever wish you took the gold?" Alan smiled, slow and sure. "I did take the gold," he said, "just not the kind you put in your pocket." He glanced toward Chance, who stood proudly on the trail, ears forward, eyes bright. "Some treasures," Alan added, "shine a little different." The children nodded, the wind brushed the canyon, and deep in the water the rare fish moved like tiny spirits of the past, alive because two souls had listened to the land when it called.